Guys, welcome to my channel. For part 1 of this video, when I talk about the machine, I am referring to my Cricut Maker only. If you have a Cricut Explore Air, Air 2, or Joy, I will not be going over those in this video. I will be making another video at some other time to go over those. Alright, so as you can see here, my beautiful champagne Cricut Maker. If you go ahead and lift up the lid, you can see that there are a bunch of buttons on the right hand side. There's the power button, and that little up and down arrow is the load and unload button to load and unload your mats. The Cricut symbol also looks like a C with little antennae, is to start cutting. It will start flashing green when it's ready to start cutting. So you will know when to press that button. If it's red, there's something wrong with your machine and you might have to go get it fixed. The other button, the pause button, is if you need to pause your cutting for any reason. I highly suggest not pressing this button unless your machine is about to break. If your mat is loaded incorrectly and it's getting jammed, if your machine's making some weird noise and you think you're breaking it, I would press the pause button and then unload it. But otherwise, I would try to leave it alone. The Maker also comes with built-in storage. On the left-hand side, you can see there are 2 little compartments. Those are to hold any pens or handheld tools you might have that you want to keep nearby. Also, if you look in the tray, there's a little lid that will lift up, and you can see that you can store your blades or your tips or anything extra that you might have that you might not want to lose. You can store snacks in there if you want to hide them from your husband. That works too. Ahead, you'll see 2 clamps. One is A, one is B. A is for any pens. That's your stylus pen, your infusible ink pens, any pens that you can get your hands on will probably go in A. Clamp B is for any blades you have, your knife blade, your perforation blade, your fine point blade, all blades. Design Space will tell you where to put whatever you need. So if you only need a pen, it'll tell you put it in clamp A. If you need a pen and a blade, it'll tell you put your pen in clamp A and put your blade in clamp B, and it'll tell you when to do each thing. So say you need more than one blade, you're not going to put one in A and put one in B. You will put it in B, and it'll tell you, okay, I'm done with this. Now give me the next blade, and then you'll reload it. You can also see that there's a little slot above the clamps. This is to hold any devices that you may have. So say you have a tablet or your phone or anything that you want to keep track of as you're crafting, you can put it there. Or even if you're using one of those devices for design space, that's a handy little place to put it. I don't typically put anything in it because my phone's too fat, but you can if you want. These are your cutting mats, so every color can hold different materials. Your light grit mat, the blue one, comes in 12 by 12 and 12 by 24. It will hold printer paper, thin cardstock, vinyl, those sort of things. Your standard grit mat, the green one, also comes in 12 by 12 and 12 by 24. It will hold slightly thicker materials like your cardstock, your pattern paper, your heat transfer vinyl, and just regular vinyl. Your strong grit mat, the purple one, again 12 by 12 and 12 by 24. It holds your thicker materials, so your chipboard, your leather, your bonded fabric, your acrylic, wood, etc. All of these will also have to probably be taped down because they are so thick and they have such a hard time sticking. You don't want them to move in your maker, so it is highly recommended to tape them down as well with just like painter's tape or something that's not too sticky to ruin your mat. And lastly, there is the fabric mat, the pink one. Again, 12 by 12 and 12 by 24. It holds, you guessed it, fabric, but it is only non-bonded fabric and delicate materials. Lastly, we have self-healing mats. These come in a variety of sizes. I have two there. One is a 12 by 12 and one is a 16 by 20, maybe? They range in size. You can also get them on Amazon. It doesn't have to be a Cricut brand. It is just for cutting. It doesn't need to be anything fancy. I got the Cricut ones because it matched the color scheme I was going for in my craft room. I know that's a really lame reason, but that's why I got that one. I thought it was pretty. These mats are not meant to go into your machine. So just use handheld tools to cut stuff on them. That is it. No material should be put on them to go in the machine. And I don't know why people would necessarily try it when materials don't stick to it like they stick to the cutting mats, but it is a very common mistake, so I'm letting you know they do not go in the machine. On the back side of the mats are actually lines and angles to help you cut fabric to size if you need it. I typically just use my ruler and draw a line, but to each their own. A note about all of the cutting mats is to put the clear film back on them to help protect them, and to put them on the same way that you took them off so that the dirt that you collect or the dust that you collect will not get on your mats.
This is my beautiful collection of blades and tips. So we're going to start with the quick swap housing first. So with the quick swap housing, basically you can buy one of those housings and then just the tips of all of the other blades. So the debossing, the engraving, the wavy, the perforation, the scoring wheel, and the double scoring wheel, all of those will work on the quick swap housing. You can buy them all with the housing if you want, but it does make storing it harder to have all of those with the housing.
The first tip that you can get for the quick swap housing is the scoring wheel. This is for extra deep score lines. It is mostly used on cardstock and paper crafts. The second one is the double scoring wheel. This is for thicker materials. The perforation blade is to make tear-offs. It will cut cardstock and poster board. The debossing tip is to create patterns, monograms, logos, an indent essentially in your material. It will cut cardstock, foil, and craft board, for example. It's similar to engraving, except that it doesn't actually cut the material, it mostly just makes an indent in it. Number 31, the wavy blade. It just makes a wavy edge. So whatever you're cutting, whether it's HTV, vinyl, paper, cardstock, it'll just make a wavy edge to it, and that's all there is to it. It is pretty cool though. And lastly is the engraving tip, number 41. It can make things like dog tags, nameplates, wood carvings. It will cut materials like soft metals, acrylic, plastic. I've seen a lot of projects using acrylic to make lights for their kids. So it'll have a light base and an acrylic piece on top of it that's engraved, and it'll look like a soccer ball or a football or something.
Then you have your other blades. These are not quick housing blades now. It is your fine point blade and your deep point blade. Your fine point blade comes with your machine. You will use it the most probably out of every blade that you have, depending on what you do, but it is the most used typically. It will cut light to medium materials like cardstock and vinyl or heat transfer vinyl, that sort of thing. And your deep point blade is for your thicker materials like chipboard or cardboard. Your rotary tool only comes with the maker. It will cut fabrics and delicate materials without the backing. So for bonded fabrics, you will have a bonded fabric tool as shown here. Both will make projects like quilts, stuffed animals, clothing, etc. But one is meant for unbonded fabrics and one is meant for bonded. Lastly, we have the knife blade. It comes in both a handheld and a tool for your machine. They both serve the same purpose, but one is more of an accurate cut. Obviously, trying to do intricate cuts by hand probably won't look as good as if you have it done by your machine, but it's up to you. I usually use the handheld one for cutting things like my wallpaper. I'm not going to run that through the machine because it's too big. I'll just cut it by myself. Whereas cutting a wood sign to be a certain letter, I would use my knife blade within the maker. Lastly, we have a compatibility chart. This just shows you some of the blade options and if they're compatible with the machine that you have. So basically, every single blade that is in existence will work in the maker, whereas the Explorer and Explorer Airs, very few of them are available. Like I said before, the fine point blade will work for a majority of projects. So if you're cutting vinyl or you're cutting heat transfer vinyl to make shirts or you're cutting cardstock, paper, etc., your fine point blade and your deep point blade will do a majority of things. It is the maker just does those specialty materials. So these are the tools that would come in your basic or essentials toolkit with Cricut. The scissors will cut everything but fabric and the thicker materials, obviously. Scraper and the extra large scraper remove material that's left over on the mat. The edge distresser is what it sounds like. So you put your paper through it and it will create a cool little distressed look for it to make it look older. The tweezers are meant to pick up small pieces when weeding. I don't find them particularly helpful. Most of the time, I use my fingernails. Maybe if you don't have fingernails, you can use them, but I don't. The weeder is to remove small pieces that you don't need in your design, so the negative space. It is probably the best tool and the most often used tool that you will have. Um, it is very sharp, so try not to stab yourself. The pieces will get stuck to it, so try to have something to collect them, like a sticky piece of paper to put it on, or some people have like a nail polish holder. attached to their finger and they just put it in there. It's like a little cup almost. Um, and you will find pieces randomly the next day on your shirt or in your hair. It I don't know how it happens, but it happens to most of us. So don't feel bad. The badge of honor to have a random piece of vinyl stuck to you. The spatula is to lift up material off of the mat or off of the backing that it's on. Again, I typically use my nails. I've also stabbed myself enough times because I use my nails, so maybe don't be like me. The brayer is to roll the material onto a mat smoothly and to get rid of any bubbles that may form. It is a very, very handy tool. I would highly recommend it. Before I had this tool, I only had the scraper, and that's what I would use to put materials on. And it works for the most part, but if you have a very sensitive material, that and the scraper can scratch the material, whereas the brayer will not. And the trimmer, it is meant to cut your thinner materials like vinyl and paper into straight lines. It's not a essential tool in my opinion, but it does come in handy sometimes when I'm trying to cut my vinyl down from the 12 by 12 into a little square that I need. And I'm not cutting it by hand, so it's not all jagged edges for my next project. These tools are for your paper crafts. It's your little paper craft kit that you can get with Cricut. Um, First is your little craft mat. It's a little square ruled thing in the background there. It's one side of it's for cutting and measuring, and then the other side of it's for piercing. So you can see that there's lines for measurements, and then on the other side it's foam. So if you want to pierce your paper, you're not piercing your desk or whatever surface you're on, you're just piercing the foam. You have your quilling tool, which is meant to create tight spirals. There's a little slit in the end for you to put your paper in, and it holds on to it as you roll it. The only thing with it is that it's very hard to roll it evenly and consistently. So, what I did is I got a prescription bottle cap and I poked a hole in it, and I put the quilling tool through it. And that's what I use to put on the surface so that when I roll it, it's even and consistent and the same size throughout. The piercer is just a tiny little needle. Um, it'll create little tiny cuts or embellishments in the paper. Basically, just stabs it. Uh, if you want to murder your paper, you use that tool. Seam ripper is just how it sounds. It rips seams. So, say you have a piece that's already sewn together, but you want to take it apart, you can use the seam ripper to cut the threads. Fabric shears are to cut fabrics and delicate materials only. You should not be using these to cut your vinyl or any other materials. The goal really with them is to keep them clean and free of any glue or dirt or anything that could rip your fabric or stain your fabric. The rotary tool is very similar to the fabric shears in that it can cut your fabric. The difference is one is super sharp and can go on any angle. So, say you want to cut something in a circle, it might be a little harder with the shears as opposed to a rotary cutter. And here we have a collection of just some of the random stuff for sewing. So you have a thumb guard. If you are sewing by hand, you don't want that needle to go through your thumb. A soft tape measure. It's just easier with fabrics to use a soft tape as opposed to a normal hard measuring tape. A fabric marker is just to mark maybe your cut lines, maybe your sew lines, any lines that you want to show up on your fabric, but you don't want to stay there. This will wash off in your first wash. And then your pin cushion is just to hold all of your pins, your push pins. So, say you have a bunch of push pins in your sewing project, and as you sew along, you take them out. you want somewhere to put them so they're not just collecting on your desk and potentially hurting you or falling to the ground. And lastly, for the sewing collection is the thread snips. They do what it sounds like they do. They are to cut your thread, but it's mostly to cut your thread at your sewing machine. You can use them for hand sewing, but scissors work perfectly fine for that as well. I use them to get a nice close cut to the sewing machine. And lastly, we have a stylus pen. So this is very similar to the scoring wheel and the double scoring wheel that I showed you originally for the quick swap housing. The difference is that this one will go on clamp A and not clamp B. It is not a blade. It is just a pen. And it is used to create score lines, but these aren't as deep as the blades would be. And it is only meant for your lighter materials like cardstock, or like thin cardstock, I should say. So it works perfectly fine for like cards, but if you want something more than cards, then your maker will most likely tell you that. Um, you don't really have to worry about knowing when to use which tool. Your design space will tell you what one to put in based on what material you select. So don't worry about having to memorize any of this. The design space will do it for you. So these are just some of the tool sets that you can get that have multiple tools in them as opposed to buying everything individually. I do have most of these because I didn't realize when I first started that I wouldn't use a lot of these depending on what projects I was working on. So don't make my mistake. Figure out what kind of projects that you plan on doing, at least for the first little while you're learning. You won't be doing everything there is to do, most likely. So if you plan on doing t shirts and vinyl projects only, I would suggest the basic tool set. If you're focusing more on sewing, then obviously the sewing kit would be more preferable. If you're doing paper crafts, then again, the paper craft set. But in terms of basic versus the essential toolkit, I would just stick with the basic one. The essential one does come with the trimmer and the scoring stylus, which is always nice to have. But I've only ever used the scoring stylus once, and I use the scoring wheel far more. And the trimmer, like I said before, it's a nice tool to have, but I wouldn't call it essential, especially when you're starting out. You don't want to waste all of your money buying everything there is to have. Try to keep yourself limited to what you're actually going to use and figure out what you're actually going to want to do and then go from there. I know it's very, very hard to restrain yourself when you're excited. I went out and I bought all of the tools, all of the accessories, all of the tips, all of the blades. I got very, very, very excited and I only use maybe half at this current time. So, not that I'll never use the other ones because I do have plans for it, but I spent all this money up front that I could have waited. So, that is my advice to you guys. Figure out what your projects are going to be for the first little while and buy the sets for that. Definitely the basic tool set will probably be one of those sets that you have to buy, and then maybe a sewing kit or a paper craft kit on top of that. The weeding tool set, I don't think you need. I don't personally even have it. The one weeder that comes with a basic tool set is fine. You don't need multiple weeders unless you're doing some really intricate stuff. And even then, the one weeder that you have works fine. And that's it. And I hope you've learned something. I hope you know now what you should start with, tool and blade wise. I hope your maker makes a little more sense to you now. If you've liked this video, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Comment what tools you have. Do you have the Maker? Did you get it for Christmas? How long have you been crafting for? Let me know down below. Enjoy your crafting!